Hello and welcome to another edition of Ask David. We're well into the autumn, nights are drawing in, clocks change very soon, but there's lots to be getting on with in the garden, and it's still bringing up all sorts of queries from you about how to deal with certain problems or ideas for different plants and how to grow them. So I'm going to get on and answer some of your questions from this week. First off, Joan is asking about her 30-year-old rhododendron. She says it's got quite large and she wants to reduce the size of it because it really is getting in the way now. She says it's a great plant, but she doesn't want to spoil it. Joan, my advice would be to do this in two halves. So take the back of the rhododendron out first, cutting quite hard back by at least half the size of the shrub, and then once that's started to regrow and produce new shoots from low down, you can then turn your attention to the front in 1 or 2 years' time, and then you'll get the balance back into the shrub, but you won't destroy that wonderful space-filling shape that you've got in the garden at the moment. However, this is not the time of year to do it. I would wait until around about April time, end of March, beginning of April, just as the plant is stirring itself and starting to get back into growth. And as I say, reduce half at a time, half this coming spring and half probably the following or even the following spring after that. Reduce that half back so that you encourage regrowth from the base, and then you won't get rid of the shrub all in one go, if you like. You'll be able to do it in stages. Now, in a similar vein, Shirley has contacted me about when to prune her slightly overgrown hydrangea limelight. This could be tackled now, but I would be inclined to again leave it until the spring. But with the hydrangea, because it loses its leaves, I would be inclined to cut it hard back around about the middle of March, just as that plant is starting into growth. And the great news about hydrangea paniculata limelight is that you can cut it really hard back, and the great thing about it is that it regrows strongly and it should flower on that next season's growth. Other forms of hydrangea, the mop head hydrangeas, the old-fashioned ones if you like, can't be treated in that way. They need more subtle pruning out some of the old wood but leaving some of the stems in place. But your limelight can be cut hard back, almost down to ground level. It will actually do it an enormous amount of good, and you can do that every year, cutting hard back close down to the ground with the paniculata varieties and also the grandiflora varieties of hydrangea. Next, Joanne's got in touch about overwintering aeoniums. She says she doesn't have a glass house or a greenhouse, and is it okay to overwinter them in a cold frame? The cold frame, if you use it, would need to be really quite deep to get a volume of air inside that cold frame. That would really benefit those plants, those aeoniums, because they don't really like lots of humidity around them. Particularly during the winter, they prefer to be kept on the dry side, so keeping a big amount of air around them will really benefit them. And also, if the cold frame is nice and deep, then the plants low down in the cold frame will be well away from the glass, because that glass could radiate cold onto the plants that could damage them. But having said all of that, cold frame should be fine as long as it's a sheltered cold frame that doesn't really get masses amount of sun during the middle of the day, because that will cause the temperatures to fluctuate quite dramatically. And if there is going to be a frost and you've got your cold frame lid closed, then you can fling a piece of old carpet over the top of it just to keep the worst of the frost off that cold frame, and to help to protect those aeoniums inside. But during the daytime, obviously take the carpet off so that they can get the maximum amount of light that they need. But anyway, the key to getting aeoniums through the winter, keep them mostly frost-free. Doesn't need to be really warm, but as frost-free as you can, and keep them on the dry side so that they don't make lots of soft sappy growth that's very vulnerable to frost. Brian's asking about his peach tree. He says it's 3 years old, it's a great little plant, but every year, as soon as those leaves emerge more or less, they get covered in peach leaf curl. The leaves become all contorted and puckered, and the plant doesn't look very healthy, and of course that doesn't really help it to produce much in the way of fruit. So Brian, your question has come at a very apt time of year, because one of the ways that Victorian gardeners used to be able to grow peaches outside and not get peach leaf curl was by covering the plants at this time of year with like a tent, and this tent of plastic, it could be, they used to use glass, but a tent of plastic over the plant, held away from the stems and the foliage, so some sort of framework of timber with a plastic sheet over the top of it, but with the air still allowed to circulate underneath. It doesn't need to be completely encased. That will keep the winter rain off the stems, and it will drastically reduce the chances of the peach tree getting peach leaf curl spores germinating next spring. So as long as you can keep those stems dry during the winter, keep the rain off them, that will help to keep spores from germinating, and by about April next year, late March, April next year, once that peach has flowered, you can then take the whole protective screen off the top of it, and you shouldn't get peach leaf curl. Anyway, try that and let me know how you get on. And last of all, Judith is asking about resiting a well-established gooseberry bush. What's the best time of year to move it? Now, gooseberries are pretty tough plants. They're really robust, and to be honest, you could move it at any time of year. But I would say if it's a really, really old gooseberry plant, then it's probably better to take some hardwood cuttings at this time of year of the current season's stems that have firmed up and become woody. So those stems need to be about 9 inches long, cut below a bud at the base, above a bud at the top, and those 9-inch cuttings, thick as a pencil preferably, can be pushed into the ground, and you'll find that they will root really easily, and you'll have new plants ready to plant out next spring. However, if you're really determined to move your gooseberry bush, then the key thing is to dig all the way around it, about a foot away from the main stems. Dig all the way around, dig a trench 1 spade's depth, and then try and get underneath the plant so that you can lever it out. So chop underneath the roots of the plant to sever any roots that are going down into the soil, and then lever the plant out of the ground. Once you've done that, you can then use secateurs to trim any crushed or damaged roots. Don't worry too much about cutting quite a lot off, because the roots will regrow during this winter, ready to start again next spring. And then resite it in an appropriate hole, in an appropriate place in your garden, somewhere that gets sun for at least part of the day, and your gooseberry bush should transplant like that. But why not try both ways? Why not try taking the hardwood cuttings and moving the existing bush if you think it's appropriate? There we are, that's Ask David for another week. I look forward to joining you again next week to answer more of your gardening questions.